Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's February 5th, 2018, and today I thought I'd share with you a presentation I've been working on for the last couple of days, and it's about great designers. What makes a great designer? Now, previously I had posted a video probably about a year ago. I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner, and I do recommend that you see that, go back and review that video if you didn't see it before. It's not a great video, but at least it goes over the elements that I think that are necessary for good design. And it covers a whole breadth of possible designs, whether you're talking about designing a watch, designing a building, an educational center. And I created that video when I was in the thought process of how I want to design our mindful living sanctuary, our educational center here. So, but today's video is a little bit different. Lately, I've been thinking about what makes a great designer. You know, what are the characteristics? So, there are many things that can make a great designer, and I think about structure and function and a whole bunch of different characteristics, which I'm going to go into. So, let's go ahead and get started. So, there are 10 elements that great designers share. At least this is my perspective based on the experiences I've had thus far in life. So, you know, when we think about Frank Lloyd Wright, this is one architect and designer that created a living environment that was immersed in nature. Kind of what I would always think as being the ideal home to live in. And I think another form of great design is when we look at the Aztecs, and instead of having to go ahead and conquer more other kingdoms and other neighbors to meet the needs of an expanding population, they went ahead and created chinampas. Probably one of the most productive forms of gardening and farming that's ever been known. And they took the rich sediment at the base of the waterways and built up these rich, very productive garden beds right through the water systems. And they created, you know, just an amazing structure that met the needs of a rapidly expanding population. So let's get started. The first characteristic of great designers is they tend to keep things simple. Dynamic simplification of the user interface. Now, my wife Thea is a great teacher for me. I'm one of those people who likes to be on the cutting edge of technology. I really like to explore and tinker, which means that you may need to know some programming. You may have to click a few buttons, twist a few dials, jerry-rig some wiring systems to make things work, where in the final design, in the user interface, less is usually better. Too many choices are unnecessary and confusing. The touch screen is so much more intuitive than clicking on various menus and then sub-menus and so on. So just probably 2 decades ago, the first point and shoot or digital consumer-based cameras were hitting the market, and people decided instead of these big old tape systems or film systems that needed to be sent off, these things really took off like wildfire. The resolution wasn't great, but they gradually improved over time. Then came about the GoPro, and that created a whole new market initially for, I'd say, prosumers, people who are adventure seeking. You know, if they're skydiving, if they're scuba diving, if they're surfing, if they're snowboarding, whatever it was, you could capture the moment and share those wild and crazy moments. It was fantastic marketing. Initially of a camera that wasn't much more advanced than the first one, but they put it in a case, they strapped it to a helmet, they strapped it to a stick, they strapped it to a surfboard, and that was a new feature. Great marketing with that, by the way. Then we had the next level of cameras. We had screens that you could actually see, and that ultimately flipped out. And so we could see, instead of having to hold the camera up to our eye, we could hold it in different positions, get shots of things that were more challenging or difficult. It made it more user-friendly. So this was an advancement in consumer cameras. Then ultimately we got to the touchscreen. Wow, a touchscreen that was also a flip screen. Well, those are you YouTube creators out there. A really fantastic advancement in design. Then the smartphones finally got up to the point where the cameras, we have dual cameras, we have flashes, we have a really improved software on it, and it's a phone. It can fit in your pocket. So right now, the whole consumer camera, digital camera industry is falling apart. It's probably going to disappear. Even GoPro could potentially disappear soon. So why carry all that stuff if your smartphone, and they'll probably make those completely waterproof before you know it as well. So it meets so many needs. It's an elegant design. It's touchscreen, handy, easy to use, and it has all of the latest features that someone can go ahead and share on social media instantly right away. So keeping it simple. Details are very essential for a craftsman. Craftsmanship is everything. Years ago, you really knew fine furniture by looking at the joinery, looking at the back of the dresser, looking at the details in the frame, looking at the thread count in the quilts that were done. So, and things have evolved for this rapid production of materials and all, but great designers still fall back on those basic principles of striving for excellence. And they started off by choosing their mentor, choosing someone who was, an expert in the field, that taught them to develop strategies and plans, to look at the details, envision and focus on the user interface, how this would be used. It wasn't about hiding defects. It was making sure that those defects were eliminated. That was the sign of excellence in craftsmanship. And that is one of the essential elements of great designers. So another important feature of great designers is, failure should be embraced. Failures are opportunities. And if you've watched my other videos, you know that I'm often saying fear of failure and pain are elements of my being successful in the various fields that I've been in. I embraced each one of those and learned from them. And certainly Michael Jordan said, I've failed over and over, and that's why I succeed. Failure isn't to be avoided. It means that you're not taking the opportunity to grow. Look at them as building blocks of character, strength, skills, integrity, and wisdom. Work at it and work at it and work at it until it's right. Failure is important to embrace. So keep failing until you fail gracefully, like a martial arts expert. So another element of great designer is the design is never ever done. It's a never-ending process. They never leave well enough alone. If it ain't broke, yes, it still can be improved. Be persistent. They regularly revisit the design. It's a cyclic process. They strive to improve not only the weaknesses, but also the best features, constantly trying to make the user experience excellent. So another aspect of the great designer, and this is a quote from Bill Mollison, is the problem is the solution. It's not accepting problems as obstacles. They don't get overwhelmed so easily, such as our age, our memory, a disease process that we're dealing with, a disability, a handicap, a problem with the weeds in the garden, the pests, the poor soil, the amount of time we have in a day, the energy, the debt. Yes, the problems can be like a huge burden. However, it always seems impossible until it's done, by Nelson Mandela. Enough said. So Lyme disease is an example of a problem in this area. So what can we do as far as a solution? So we have this Ixodes scapularis, this tick, that actually has a couple of hosts, the white-footed mouse, and most people are familiar with the white-tailed deer, and they're indigenous to this area. So the ticks are transmitted from the various hosts and get into other intermediate hosts, such as cats and dogs, and even onto people. And if you're so unfortunate as to have been bitten by a tick, the organism may have been transmitted into your body, and you may have a chronic debilitating disease. So most people want to do all they can to eliminate it. Now you could use various pesticides and chemical treatments, or you may cut your, just have a very short lawn or pave your backyard, whatever. But the problem is a solution. So let's look for natural predators. Well, ants and spiders and birds and are generalists, but they're thought to consume ticks, but they're all around. And even if we put in various hedgerows and all, and do farmscaping and put in food forests, well, geez, we're going to create more habitats for the deer and the white-footed mice to be in here, and I don't think that they'll necessarily keep the tick burden down. Well, guinea fowl and chickens are known, so you can have the chickens all over the food forest, and we've had that. Do they consume ticks? I'm certain that they do, but I think that's a very small percentage of their diet. So what about wild turkeys? Well, wild turkeys come onto our property and they probably consume some ticks, but of all the wild turkeys that I've opened up the crop on years ago, I've never identified a tick. I've seen lots of berries and grains and seeds and stones and all in there. I could have missed ticks, but it wasn't really one of the mainstays of their diet. But when we think about opossums, it's not one of the things that they want to consume, but they're fastidious groomers. They really groom themselves very well. And so it's reported that they really eat thousands of deer ticks because they're constantly slowly moving through the area. They're in the same habitat that cats and dogs will get in, and they're right close to the ground. And they do get the ticks on them, but I've never found the ticks on them. They groom themselves so well, and they're consuming them. So possibly one of the solutions is to create habitats around our neighborhoods, around our farms and our gardens that house the opossums, so that we can keep the Lyme disease at bay. Okay, another important element of good designers is they go beyond what's expected. Clients don't always know what's best. Recognizes that clients sometimes can't differentiate or haven't differentiated what their needs are versus their desires. They readily tell you what they want out of life or what they want out of a project, but they may not know what their needs are. And that's important to identify what their needs are. Understanding the full story or the context that they're coming from, their situation is in. So if the context is right for the design, then it'll feel natural. So try to understand the why, not necessarily just what they want, but why they want it. Ask insightful questions. Listen carefully. Play back and rephrase what it is that they said to get a more thorough understanding of what their goals and aspirations are. A friend of ours knew that I did lots of building, or did all the buildings around here. Excuse my voice. And she said, well, what do you think about a building that I'm thinking of? Now, she never showed me any designs, but her idea was a grand room with small little outpouchings from the building, similar to this. This is what I imagined. So it's a grand center room where there might be small rooms or offices, bedrooms, offices, a kitchen, or whatever off of the main area. And my first thoughts were, geez, yes, I can see these 5 separate rooms off a grand area, but I could see nothing but problems. I saw increased material usage, more waste, more drainage problems. We live in a very cold, temperate, high snow accumulation area. So I saw the snow accumulation in between each one of these small little outbuildings off the sides of the main structure. I saw drainage problems. I saw decreased solar gain in our very cloudy, cold, temperate climate. So, it just seemed like it just wouldn't work in this climate. This building may be appropriate in a tropical area or in a desert, more desert environment where we're capitalizing on shading and cooling with cross ventilation. It may work very well. So I said, geez, what about a hexagon or an octagon? He says, no, I really want the grand central room and these small buildings coming right off this side. Well, what about something a little bit different? We can take something that's an interesting shape, make it oblong, and have a grand central room. Well, no. So the client goals wouldn't meet my desires to design a building for them, because I'm all about being sustainable, being less of a resource dependent structure, building a structure that fits in with the climate, with the topography, with the features of the soil in the area as well. So it's really important to get to the basics of what the client's goals actually are. The power of analogies. This is sort of one of my strengths. So, applying applying bits of knowledge that you have in one area to other areas sometimes can work very well. So here's an example. So with microorganisms, live rock with coral reefs. So for many years I had aquariums, and I still have one reef aquarium, and then I gradually moved from tropical fish to marine reef aquariums. And that was a big leap because we have all of what's called live rock. Now, of course, the rock isn't living. It's remnants of old expanding coral that had died off, but it has tremendous surface area and therefore habitat for all the microorganisms that can inhabit that live rock. And those microorganisms are essential to break down the waste products from the marine life that are in the area to biotransform that waste into nutrients that the coral are dependent on. So it's this whole zero waste ecosystem, which really works extremely well. So it's a way of dealing with waste and providing a valuable resource. So that's when I thought about building a bioremediation system here on site, where we take the waste products from a landfill nearby, all the waste products from our buildings and structures, the potential waste from runoff from neighbors' farming areas as well. And then I found out about John Todd and living systems that living machine that he's designed. So like the Omega Institute, I believe, that's a large complex with many people working and living in this environment. And so all of their waste products go through this bioremediation system, which also not just includes microorganisms, but also includes plant life and maybe even fungi as well. And so the wastewater goes through, feeds all of these plants, makes valuable crops for them to consume, and purifies the water, so that water that was once used gets reused over and over and over again. It's recycled over and over again. So understanding the microorganisms in live rock and bioremediation system, well, the Human Genome Project finished just over a decade ago, and where we started to understand the impact of the genes in the human body, and then they delved into the Human Microbiome Project, where we started to understand, geez, the microorganisms outnumber us 10 to 1 as far as cells go, and their genetic the ramifications of their genetic attributes either can help enhance our quality of life or decrease our quality of life depending on what we consume. So if we're consuming the standard American diet, then we're promoting inflammation, radical oxygen intermediates, and cancer, cardiovascular disease. And we owe a lot of this to the dysregulation, dysbiosis within our digestive system. So, and that's just one part of the human microbiome, where if we feed them much more fiber and more of a plant-based diet, those microorganisms get overwhelmed by probiotics, good mutualistic symbiotic organisms, and they do all these beneficial things that provide certain vitamins and phytonutrients and other nutrients that were biotransformed from waste products. And that alleviates some of the inflammation, neutralizes, helps with methylation, biotransformation, and so on within our bodies, and decreases the chances of the gene defects that we potentially have, that we could potentially develop into diseases, whether it's breast cancer, prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and so on and so forth. So by understanding the human microbiome project, we can understand how we can work with microorganisms in our digestive system. And that's just amazing. And so bioremediation is something that I've talked about before. I'll be talking more about that in the future, as well as the human microbiome and how we can utilize the microbiome and alter our own microbiome to create a more sustainable and healthy life. Well, so here's an example of here are pictures with the various microbiomes within different areas. So we have microbiomes in our nasal cavity, in our oral cavity, on the plaque of our teeth, in the vagina, on the penis, on the armpit, all of the places under our nail beds. We have all these different colonies of microorganisms in different areas. So that's something, and we can get skin infections as a result of not just the microorganisms in our colon, but also opportunistic pathogens that get into our skin as well and get a secondary skin infection after we have eczema or some other skin eruption, inflammatory, non-infectious inflammatory process that ultimately provides a home for infectious agents to set up shop in. So that makes us move on to the next area. That is something that I think is an essential thing to understand, is our soil microbiome. So those microorganisms that are within the soil and on the surface of the plant are equally as important for creating optimal nutrients within those plants so that we can have the optimal nutrition for ourselves and create abundance all around us, and appropriate carbon farming as well to help solve some of the climate issues that we have. And then we can move on to the next area, which is the effective microbes. So taking microorganisms and realizing that there's groups of microorganisms that live on the surface of our body. There's microorganisms that can break down sludge and debris that's built up in our waterways or algae blooms. There's, let's say, our operating rooms. Well, instead of having to use quaternary ammonia compounds or chlorinated products to kill or disinfect the surgical suite, we may be able to go ahead and just spray in effective microorganisms in the future and clean our surgical suites. Use these for antiperspirants. Use these for cleaning our clothes. All sorts of possibilities for using beneficial. We know that enzymes can break down the odor and the debris that's left from cat or dog or pet dander or feces or urine that goes in our carpets or on the floor. Well, that's just the beginning of it. It's the microorganisms that can do all this breaking down. They can produce the enzymes that are necessary and feed on the systems. They may be able to clean up our oil spills and clean up the waste that we're creating as a civilization. So it's the power of analogy and realizing how we can apply the science that we've learned from one area into other areas. The other element of important characteristic of great designers are they own it. They walk their talk. They don't just walk one way and talk another way and promote something and not live by it. We see that far too often with politicians and large corporations. They may drink the best water, eat the best food, drive the best vehicle. Their kids may go to the best schools, but they aren't necessarily making sure that you're able to have the same situation. So owning it is so important. So this guy, Steve, is an avid workshop person. He does carpentry work or does cabinet work, and he's also a physicist. And he invented this apparatus called the saw stop. Well, he saw a problem, and the problem was, I guess, up to about 10 people a day lose fingers with saws. and on table saws. And so he thought, geez, let me apply some of the things that I know from, well, we know that Indy cars and race cars and now consumer cars all have crush zones in them, where we used to build things, big, heavy steel roll cages, and we didn't create crush zones, big, heavy, massive things that created more injury to people. And he saw, geez, the application of these crush zones is real important, and if we could detect when a finger comes near the blade, touches the blade, and instantaneously stop that blade, we could stop it from doing damage to the finger and taking the finger off and decrease all this pain and suffering. So he used his knowledge as a physicist and created an apparatus that immediately detects it. Now, because this is taking longer than I hope, I won't show the video, but I'll put a link in the description below so that you can go and see this video of how he created this, and using a hot dog, which has the same salt content as ocean water as our tissues, and it immediately crushes the apparatus that holds the blade where it's going to be and protects the finger from the massive revolutions of that very sharp blade that could easily cut through the hand. So that's someone who actually owned his own design and uses it every day. So here's an aspect of design that I want to talk about. I've talked about thermal mass. I've talked about solar panels. I've talked about passive solar design. And I've talked about super insulation. So I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner for when I was building the work area and chicken coop and how we insulated that building, similar to how we insulated our house. Now, the chicken coop and work area is made from 2x6s that are 16 inches on center. And this is I don't know if it's a cartoon or an actual thermal image of a house, but it represents things very well. So in the bar down below, we can see that the most amount of heat loss is colored in red, and we go through yellow, white, and then we get to a greenish color and blue color. So there's very little heat loss. So it looks like in this picture that the roof is very well insulated. There's very little heat, but as you would expect, the glasses have a lot of heat loss. The windows do. So the heat radiates out through it. But we see the next area where there's a lot of what we call thermal bridging, where each one of these studs, whether they're 2x4s, 2x6s, or 2x8s, leaks a lot of energy. The heat moves from the warm internal compartments out to the external environment. Heat always transfers from the warm compartment into the cold compartment. So there's a loss of heat energy requiring more resources, non-renewable energy resources most likely, to heat that building during the wintertime and to cool it during the summertime. So what I've talked about before is a better way of designing, instead of putting insulation between the studs, is to wrap the insulation around the exterior over the studs, as we did in the chicken coop. So you can click on that link, go back and see the video to see how it was actually designed and constructed. And so we eliminated this problem. So we have low thermal insulation where these studs are. So yes, there's good insulation in between the studs, and the more insulation you put, the darker the blue it will get. So let's use our home as an example. Now, I'm just going to be looking as if we use studs, 16 inches on center, as most people do. Our home is actually different. It's passive solar. It's facing south, with all our windows facing south, predominant number of windows facing south. It's an open envelope. It has a large thermal mass. So we have all these other benefits, but we're just covering right now in this first part how much you would lose through the studs if I had insulated this building and constructed it conventionally. So 24 by 40 is 128 linear feet if you expand out all the walls. That's 1,536 inches. If the studs are 16 inches on center, then we know that we divide the 16 inches into that, and we know that there's a total of 96 studs. So, and that doesn't include the extra studs around the windows or the corners or the bottom plates or the top plates or the floor joists or where the roof would mount onto, all these other places. We're just looking at the thin vertical studs. So 96 studs that are 1.5 inches, so a 2x4 or a 2x6 or a 2x8 is 1.5 inches thick if you bought it from the lumber yard where it's been planed down and kiln dried. So 96 inches times 96 studs times 1.5 inches is 144 inches or 12 feet. So that's almost 10% of the entire length of this 128-foot linear foot wall. So we have thermal bridging, heat loss, not as much heat loss as glass, but of 12 feet. So that's almost 10% loss of energy as compared to the insulation being wrapped around the outside of it, which is of minimal cost incurrence. So I decided, let's go ahead and look up. I found a little calculator on manta.com. You can see down here at the bottom of the screen. I'm sure this is a heating and cooling place, so this may not be accurate. They may be exaggerated so that they can promote sales, but I'm just using what they're saying. In Oswego, New York, you plug in your zip code into the calculator, and it says minimum cost, maximum cost, and average cost. So I use the average cost. $6,262 per year is the cost of heating and cooling the home. So I said, geez, since this is in Oswego, New York, we'll take the $6,262 and we'll multiply it by almost the 10% and see how much that is. So that's a savings annually of $587. We multiply that times 35 years because we built the house 35 years ago, and we end up with a savings of $20,500. So that's interesting. So we saved ourselves that much just by increasing changing the insulation from between the studs to going around the outside of the building, and eliminating thermal bridging. So that's the thing. So I thought it'd be fun to say, okay, we got passive solar design. We have a large thermal mass unit, excuse me, a large thermal mass unit, which is a heat retention battery. And in the upper right-hand corner, I'll click on one of the links for the thermal mass that I've gone over in the house design before. Excuse me. And let's see how much we've saved, because we really don't have a heating bill. So we take that average $6,262 multiplied by 35, and we saved ourselves $219,000 over the last 35 years, and we hope to live in here at least another 50 years. So, and again, this cost is I think it just can be adjusted down for the amount of the inflation over time. Over the years, you can look at this any way you want, but it ends up being a significant amount by looking at the design and monitoring these things. And you've seen in the videos before, I've shown what the temperatures are in various parts from the peak of the house to the and we like our temperature at about 80 degrees. 78 to like 81, 82 degrees is our comfort zone. So we live very, very comfortably. In the summertime, we like it about 78. When it's hot outside, you want to feel cool. And it's that initial investment was only a tiny fraction of this. Our entire house didn't cost anywhere near this amount to build it initially. So that's how much you can save by appropriate design for the climate, the topography, and your orientation. All of those things which I've talked about in previous videos. So it's about owning it, living the design that you're trying to promote. It's not, that's just one of the characteristics that I think is so important. This characteristic of great designers I got from Elon Musk, and I really think he's a brilliant guy. It's first principle thinking. It's thinking like a physicist. Boil things down to their fundamental truths. We need to get to the science behind. This is where analogies don't apply. If you're, it's one thing to take an analogy. It's sort of like taking, all right, Kevin built this house in this location. Well, let's take this and move this house into Texas and face this south oriented. Well, that would be, the context is completely wrong because we're closer to the equator. You don't have the cold Arctic winds here. You have a heat problem there. It'd be cooling. So it would be inappropriate to use that analogy. So we want to look at the science and do our calculations and see what the best design would be. So identify and define the current assumptions, what it is that you assume that you want. And that was getting back to that interview with the client and trying to find out why they want what they want and trying to figure out how can we best create the environment they want in the context of the environment that they're actually in. I hope that made sense. Break it down into the most fundamental aspects and start creating from scratch. That's what Elon Musk has done with the Tesla and with SpaceX. You know, never before had someone taken the first stage of a rocket and brought it back and landed it down successfully. And it's really going to these first principles. Same thing with the battery design with the Tesla car. Proof of concept with the Roadster, and then following through, and everyone has benefited because it's been open source design. So to the 10th and final aspect of the great designers, they're enthusiastic, they're designers, they're creators, they have a passion, they want to make a difference. They get to the why this design, not what the design is or who it's for. It's the why this is the best design. In some ways, we can think about this as Steve Jobs, because he was the one who would be out there, and I think he was a fantastic marketer, and I think he was someone that could see things. He had a good team. He surrounded himself with great designers, but at least he had the foresight to envision, what people need, the easiest user interface, and features that they hadn't even thought about having, or wouldn't even think that they would value, but now that are absolute necessities. But the person I would use is Nikola Tesla. He was a recluse. He didn't have the charisma. He wasn't a marketer, but his creations and demonstrations certainly created great inspiration. So much inspiration that this day and age, people are still falling back to his designs and making some of these things a reality at this point. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it was a bit long, like most of my videos. If you liked it, please give us a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Leave a comment, ask a question. I'm always interested in what you think of the topic that we shared and the sorts of topics that you'd like to see more of. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Have a fantastic day.